Penn State has landed a ton of impact players already out of the transfer portal. They've also been dealt some tough losses too.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in. It is a Locked On crossover to talk Penn State football and the transfer portal. My name is Seyko, and I'm your host of Locked On Nittany Lions. As always, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. And if we're going to talk transfer portal, we'll look no further than the transfer portal expert himself, Brian Smith, host of The Portal. And we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network out there. Well, Brian, Penn State's not finished. They are expected to land over 30 transfer portal players overall. Who else do they need to target? A bulk of them have come from Iowa State, and these are impact players. But along the way, they've been dealt some tough losses. So we're going to go over all of it. This is the primer, the recap for how Penn State's done to start the transfer portal. Overall, Brian, I've been impressed. I've been extremely impressed because Penn State, it couples with the fact of who they've been able to retain, but also the impact players overall. So the best additions to this point, if I had to name a handful, I'll go with 3 right out of the gate. 2 on offense, 1 on defense. It's Rocco Becht, and I guess you could say Alex Mansky overall. It's the quarterback position. You get a starter. You potentially get your starter for the future, either 2 or 3 years, if Alex Mansky, right, follows the blueprint and everything. And then you get an instant impact player at wide receiver. Chase Sowell is a guy that does a little bit of everything. He's a deep threat. He's an intermediate threat. He can win right off the line of scrimmage. He's not just a one-trick wide receiver. And then Marcus Neal, who is a jack of all trades on defense. 11 tackles for loss at the safety spot. 11 tackles for loss. He could be Penn State's leading tackler next season because he's physical. He can cover, but honestly, he's a defensive back masquerading as a linebacker. Brian, where has Penn State impressed you the most with the initial additions, whether they're Iowa State or retained Penn State players?
I think it's quarterback because every program starts there. You get your future potentially, as you duly noted. And Rocco's a guy, I mean, I know him, maybe I'm just biased, but like I lived in Tampa when he was there, and he's just a leader. I don't think you'll have any problems acclimating to anything with Penn State where it's at, the coaching staff that's blended in or anything else. He's a good guy. And when you get that, it's a great start. And then you get somebody that Iowa State's staff is familiar with transferring in. So Rocco and him have familiarity. Like, this is what you're looking for. Now the question becomes, how do they do that at all the other positions? They've set the bar pretty high there, but quarterback to me is the runaway.
Yeah, and it's because when it's a 1-to-1 comparison between Becht and Grunkemeyer, that's tough to justify, right? Grunkemeyer's settled in, but also you got to think about this. And I started to get into it as well. Becht has the upper hand because he's been in this offense. He's been with Matt Campbell now for 4 seasons, right? And then being specifically in Taylor Mauser's offense, who's the new OC. So Grunkemeyer, if you put them into a quarterback battle, hypothetically, I imagine that Becht wins that, not just because of, he's the veteran, he's the experienced guy, but also just the knowledge of the playbook, knowledge of the system. I mean, Grunkemeyer, is still a talented quarterback. He's most likely going to end up at Virginia Tech based on the latest intel here. But the move for Penn State to go and not just only either get their guy as the starting QB, but upgrade the room overall. That's the win. You're upgrading the quarterback depth chart overall.
That's very important. Getting balance, having a starter next year, but not being completely out of the loop with what's going to happen next. Not every program that's even staying pat at their head coaching position can say that, which part of that's Portal's fault as well. But Penn State's in a better spot there, and there's no position on any team in any sport that delegates other players coming to that program more than a quarterback does. So offensive linemen, running backs, tight ends, and receivers. Penn State's probably going to get a little bit of a boom from that. You got to have somebody to get you the ball. You have to have somebody to get you in the right play or out of the wrong one. Rocco Becht, it kind of starts right there. So you're starting to see like all the Iowa State guys. Now I expect Penn State to pick up a few more guys just from around the country. Don't be surprised if they get a big play receiver either.
There are definitely tons of players. Like I said, this isn't just about getting Penn State and Iowa State players.
Right.
They're going to have to expand beyond that, which we'll talk about more in depth later on in the show. Let's continue. Again, it's going to be fairly Iowa State focused to this point in time, but they did get a number of starters. Okay, if you're going to run a lot of 12 and 13 personnel, it's important to go and get the 2 starting tight ends from Iowa State in Benjamin Bramer and Gabe Burkle. But in addition to Chase Sowell, you also, I mean, this was 1A, 1B when it came to leading at receiver. Brett Eskelson on the outside, who has a little more speed than people give him credit for. So Sowell is your big threat home run player. And then Eskelson can honestly, he does have the home run threat ability as well, but I would say is a little more reliable underneath. These are all starting caliber players from Iowa State that are carrying over to Penn State. I will name all the guys that I fully expect to start or play a time. So Becht, Carson Hansen at running back, Eskelson, yes, Sowell, Marcus Neal, Jamison Patton is going to play. And these guys were starting safeties, right? And then a guy like Trevor Burr, who was the starter at guard. Well, Penn State, hey, they had an open guard spot. So Penn State, these aren't just Iowa State holdovers that, because they're connected to Matt Campbell, it's basically a sympathy edition, right? These are guys that are expected to step up and have played well for the past 2 or 3 seasons.
This is a great group. I'm glad you brought up Hansen, by the way, who's one of the best running backs, just like a pure running back in college football. Mm-hmm. And he is no fun to tackle. He's at least 220. I'd guess he's close to 230. That guy just kind of fits Penn State football. I'm excited to see what he does. Getting the tight ends. I know Penn State's losing a couple guys there, but like Bramer is, that's an NFL player. Mm-hmm. They're going to get guys that kind of fit in with the culture, at least what I think of, what I grew up with Penn State. So that's really good news. My biggest question is, are there any more guys coming over from Iowa State? And out of the defensive guys they got, we've talked mostly offense, not all, but mostly guys that are going to play on the offensive side. How well will the defensive guys help Penn State? And is it going to be enough where they don't have to spend a bunch of money on the defensive side of the football from other programs?
I would say my concern lies with the defenders that are coming over from Iowa State, right? They are contributors, but notice how, a lot of the names that I listed out were offensive guys. Okay. Quarterback, running back, tight end, offensive line, wide receiver. It's the front 7 of Iowa State that wasn't going to solve any of Penn State's issues. And then we're going to talk about some of the biggest losses that hit Penn State. Well, they came in the front 7, right? Amare Campbell, Chaz, Coleman, right? We'll get into that in the upcoming segment here, Brian, but you pointed out, you put a spotlight on it here. The front 7 is an issue, and there's not any Iowa State players. There might be 1 or 2 that I would hope that still come over from Matt Campbell's previous roster, but it doesn't solve what could be the Achilles heel if Penn State doesn't figure it out anywhere in the transfer portal.
Yeah, like defensive linemen, offensive tackles, there aren't a lot of those guys. Penn State's probably not as bad off as most at offensive line, but like defensive line, they definitely need help. Oh, yeah. Are they going to get that? You know what I mean? Like, is that realistic? Because like I'm literally looking at the numbers.
It's not good. It's concerning. It is concerning.
Like there just isn't what they need there to be in the portal. So I have a feeling that they're going to have to wait on some other guys, and they're going to have to move some players around. Maybe they'll be a little light, especially off the bench at defensive tackle. There just aren't any options. Those guys just don't get in the portal. So that would be my own one concern. And it's not just Penn State either. Like Florida State just lost 3 defensive linemen today. They're a terrible spot. Like everybody who loses D linemen, you're going to feel that sting the next season, probably before the end of September, let alone November, after the season takes a few of your starters out of the lineup due to injury. So if Penn State can get over that hump, they can find one guy there, they'll be in a lot better spot. But that's the only place I'm kind of worried.
You say one guy. I'm fairly pessimistic on that. I think they need 2 or 3. Honestly, a lot more. We're going to talk about that a ton in segment 3. I will drop a couple of names here that I would like to see. So one's already committed. Elijah Carnell will be a rotational defensive lineman that's probably going to, in those odd men fronts, will be another nose tackle that will play defense. Penn State's going to run 5-man fronts, 3-man fronts. they're going to get creative in Danton's defense. And then Ike Easy Ogu, who was a defensive end at Iowa State. That's somebody that I would, if we're talking about any other former Iowa State players, that
Good
player is
play.
a must. He's a must. Yes, he is a must get for Penn State at this point. So Penn State's had a number of impact players join. They've also had a number of impact players leave. And while Penn State's been able to offset some of those losses, this still not ideal with guys that would have been stars, both on offense and on defense. We'll talk about that next here on this Locked On Crossover. And this episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Let's be real. Managing your finances can feel overwhelming. Between subscriptions you forgot about, bills that keep going up, and trying to figure out where all your money actually goes each month. It's easy to feel like you're losing control. And who has time to track every transaction or hunt down all the hidden fees? That's where Rocket Money comes in, the personal finance app that helps you take control. It finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. You will be shocked when Rocket Money shows you just what you were paying for, whether it's a subscription or something else that you completely forgot about, and it's going to save you money. It tracks all of your subscriptions and lets you cancel them right within the app in just a few taps. So there's no more hunting down customer service numbers. And the automatic transaction categorization is a game changer. You can finally see exactly where your money is going each month. You can set budgets, goals, get personalized insights, and receive real-time alerts for larger transactions, upcoming bills, and low balances. It even consolidates your checking, savings, and loans and investments into a single dashboard so you get a clear view of your entire financial picture. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That is rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. And once again, thank you for making Locked On Nittany Lions and the Portal podcast your first listener watch today. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcasting network out there. If you haven't already, go check out the all-new Everydayer Club. What is the Everydayer Club? It gives you inside access here on the Locked On Podcast Network. You will get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Nittany Lions and the Portal, or any of your favorite shows compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcasting app. You'll also get an invite to a members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of this show, or again, all your other favorite teams. Go to LockedOnNittanyLions.supercast.com or check out the links down in the show notes to learn more about the Everydayer Club. Brian, if we're going to start anywhere with the biggest losses for Penn State, we already mentioned them, and it's going to be on the defensive side, right? Because it is at a premium in the front seven. Amare Campbell, it's a great thing that Penn State got Tony Rojas, because imagine if you lost both Rojas and Campbell, guys that do it all. They cover, they can be a spy, they stop the run, they can keep up. They have the advantage, they have the athleticism to keep up with the tight end, like the size, and they also have the speed to cover a running back out of the backfield as well. Tony Rojas, when he's at 100%, and Amare Campbell, that was a duo that I was really hoping for Penn State to keep. Didn't happen, okay? And Amare Campbell was very apparent, saying that, hey, I'm being undervalued here, and I'm going to go back in the portal to get the due treatment. Okay, I understand that when we are in this world. It's still disappointing to see one way or another. And then Chaz Coleman. If with Penn State running all these different variations in a 4-2-5 or a 3-4 or a 3-3-5, anything, I feel like Chaz Coleman, who could have been utilized in a role where he's just a designated pass rusher. Just find a way to get to the quarterback. You don't necessarily have to be worried about stuffing the run. That's what the 350-pound nose tackle is going to do. Just get after the quarterback. I think he could have been a major player in Danton's defense. So when I just kind of think about the prospect and the idea of Coleman being that superstar pass rusher for Penn State, those are the first two names that come to mind when I say, hey, Penn State, these are losses that, okay, hopefully they overcome. Still not ideal because of what they do individually.
Yeah, I would agree. My prediction is like the Iowa State kid, the defensive end, maybe they get him, but they're probably going to need, like you said, a couple of D linemen. There are more than likely going to be a few players. This is not just for Penn State, but this is kind of the nature of the portal that we're not talking about that will end up there. And I'm not going to go into the school, but there's one in particular that really does not like to announce who's visiting, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
I would imagine Penn State's a little bit that way too. So when you read whether it's Penn State, Clemson, Texas, whatever, keep in mind there's always somebody else that's on that fringe. Either they're getting ready to visit or not, and there's just no information. So what Zach and I are talking about tonight is a little broad, but
Yeah.
I guarantee you it's not that hard to sell Penn State. There's one or two guys that'll visit before the end of this week we haven't mentioned. One of them's probably a defensive lineman from somewhere.
Yeah.
It's just kind of the nature of the business. So just remember that.
The defensive side has been hit more so than the offensive side here, and which is great because Penn State was able to boost the offense as it was, whereas they've kind of been offsetting the defensive losses. Okay, so we mentioned Chaz Coleman and Amare Campbell. Losing King Mack. You get Marcus Neal, but you also lose. So it's a net neutral, right? You don't really gain anything. It's not really, it's a plus that you get Marcus Neal, but you got to recover from King Mack. Imagine if you had both. Right? Imagine if you were able to retain both players. And then also Jalen Harvey. I thought that was still a player with a ton of upside. Xavier Gilliam. We want to talk about defensive tackle being a premium, Brian. Someone who is over 300 pounds shows that he carries the weight very well, right? That he doesn't just have size for the sake of having size. I know that Penn State is going to look for that 340, 350 pound nose tackle. Definitely probably two of them at least. But Gilliam, again, I envision these 5-man fronts with Granville and Kamaju on the outside, and then that 3-men defensive line rotation that would include Gilliam in that 5 tech, right? So he would line up basically, and I'm not a defensive guru, right? But I know the basics of football here, and someone like Gilliam, who would basically be a jumbo defensive end that helps take up and eats a double team that frees up Granville or Kamaju on the outside.
That's why there's so few of them in the portal. People retain them because they'll overpay. Very few of those guys get in the portal. So it's good point by you. If you're over 270 and play defense, it's low-hanging fruit for your agent. It's low-hanging fruit. Like I know somebody that's taking a guy that took him to a major program today that he's going to get over $1 million, and he's only started like part of 1 year. He's 310 pounds, and he can move.
Yeah.
It's just supply and demand, no more, no less.
Market fundamentals.
100%. Like the guy that's really good corner, better player, maybe still a premium position, may not make as much. Mm-hmm. Just more of them. So it's just the way it is. It's probably 5-to-1 corner to D tackle.
Absolutely.
And corner is not exactly a plethora, but like D tackle, it's comical. It's so bad. So anything you can get there, like especially your back office, the FCS kids, the G6 kids, and I'm just going to bring it up because he played D2. Trinidad Chambliss at Ole Miss played D2 the last 3 years.
Yep.
I mean, you talk about getting more requests for
Cam Ward.
Yeah, he was a guy. I forget the school. Incarnate Word down in San Antonio. I mean, I've driven by that school. It's like driving by the library. Yep. It's so small, but obviously he ended up doing well because first pick of the draft. Yep. So Penn State's probably going to have to find one of those, and they may have to make a few makeshift opportunities come into play. DN might play a little more D tackle, and using a 3-man front. It's one of the reasons Iowa State did it anyway. It also mitigates because you don't need that true dominant penetrating defensive tackle, which there are about 4 of in the country a year.
Yeah.
3-man fronts can help you get away from that.
I'm just looking for somebody that can do their job, that can just take on double teams and just be a space eater. And we'll get to that in just a second. Brian, I want your thoughts on the offensive side of the football, because as I look at this list again, okay, the defense, like I said, impact player, could have been a starter, could have been all conference, right? When we talk about impact players on the offense, well, you can only have one starting quarterback. Ethan Grunkemeyer is an impact player, but you get Rocco Becht, you get Alex Mansky. So that's not only a net neutral, that's a plus because you built out the QB depth chart. And then Luke Reynolds and Andrew Olish. I don't like that. Those are two former 5-star tight ends. Of course, that is a big deal. Of course it is. And I know those guys are still going to be really talented players. They have to be in a system, though, that maximizes their skill set. They're jumbo wide receivers. This isn't Andrew Rapplier and Gabe Burkle and Benjamin Bramer resemble more of the George Kittle type of tight end. Luke Reynolds, and this is an easy comparison since they were at Penn State. Andrew Olish and Luke Reynolds remind me of Mike Gesicki. They're jumbo wide receivers. They're not the best blockers, but that's what Matt Campbell's looking for. He's looking for the George Kittle types that do a little bit of everything. They can run block, they can stay in pass protection, but the best asset is being able to scheme out of that, where you come out in 12 personnel, you think they're blocking for a moment, and now you got to factor in that they can go out for a pass. Luke Reynolds and Andrew Olish are just really good receivers that are tight ends because they're too big to be a wide receiver. But that's the mismatch. Put them on a safety, put them up against a cornerback. They have the height, put them against the linebacker. They're too fast, but they're not going to be used like that at Penn State.
I think they'll find ways to use tight ends similarly, but they do play a little more power football, H-back, attached tight end. It's been their MO. Mm-hmm. Maybe once they get past this first season, they'll be able to go back to that a little bit. I just don't think they could get those guys out of high school at Iowa State. I'm not picking on them. You'll expand your offense if you can get the personnel to do it. Did Iowa State recruit like that very much? Probably not. Penn State is capable. So I expect the Penn State stable of tight ends after 2026 to be better. And you can apply that at some other spots too, D-line, et cetera. It'll get better, but you're going to have to make do in year one however you can. So, but again, get Brahmer and a few of those other guys, as long as they stay healthy, they can really be utilized and take a lot of snaps. It won't be as big a deal anyway.
I mean, you have 3 starting caliber tight ends in the short term, Rapplier, Bramer, and Burkle. All 3 of those. So they'll run a ton of 12 and 13 personnel. So, but like you said, the depth does take a hit there. And those guys are talented, but better suited in other offenses for when it comes to Olish and Reynolds. So, but Penn State still has a long list of players that they want to target. That includes a running back, a former Ohio State player, wide receivers as well. Front 7, as we've mentioned a ton. So where's Penn State going to go for defensive line, linebacker, and some of those skilled guys on offense? That is coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. Well, Penn State's not stopping with its recruitment of running backs out of the portal. Brian, I was content with Carson Hansen and Quentin Martin. But now they're going on after a former Ohio State tailback in James Peoples. We're also going to talk about wide receiver and defensive linemen and just defensive disruptors that Penn State's going to target here because they need them one way or another. But let's begin with, I think, fans who are going to be most excited about because they pad the stats, right? James Peoples was supposed to be RB1 for Ohio State this season. Never materialized. Not sure what the disconnect was. I'm sure I'll get to the bottom of it at some point. But he's in the portal because Bo Jackson overtook him, right? This is a player that if he gets into a setup can be RB1 if everything goes well. I don't look at this guy as just a depth piece, that he's just a depth addition. I see him being, and Iowa State did this in 24 when they had the depth. Hansen and 2 other running backs were in a trio dynamic. So Peoples, Martin, and Hansen, I don't know how you can get a better setup if you're Penn State at the running back spot.
Especially coming off a coaching change. Yeah, that would be pretty good. He's San Antonio kid who was extremely highly recruited.
Yep.
I would imagine that he's just been kind of lost in the shuffle. They got so many good backs, like that Bo Jackson kid, et cetera, for the Bucks.
He's kind of good. Yeah.
Yeah, he's solid. So I would imagine they're just trying to find the right fit. And if you made it at Ohio State socially and all that, Penn State probably won't be much different. I'm guessing that he's going to play some. Having 3 running backs that have some experience, got some juice, different styles, that's going to work. Good for Penn State if they can get that done. And, nothing's official till you see him in spring ball. That's kind of my rule. But nonetheless.
He is visiting. As we're recording this, Brian, he is on campus for a visit. That's half the battle.
Yeah, you got to get them there or they can't commit. That is true. So now the question is, like, how much NIL they're got to pay him and all that stuff, and will we hear any of it? but he kind of faded down the stretch for Ohio State because they had those young guys. So it's going to be fresh legs. I think it would be a great pickup for the Nittany Lions.
If you can get that trio and all three of them would play. They did this at Iowa State in 2024. The precedent's there where all three guys had 150 carries, and that's good for longevity. You don't put as much wear and tear on the tires because running back and an offensive line, that's gonna hit you the most if you don't have the depth. So this is, I say it's a want, but maybe it's even a need at that point for Penn State. Wide receiver, I like Chase Sowell. I like Brett Eskelson to go along with Kobe Howard and Tyser Denmark. Hopefully Penn State can retain, because not every wide receiver has jumped into the portal, surprisingly enough. But we're going to still talk about wide receiver because that's just been a contentious position group for Penn State the past, 3-4 seasons? So if you're looking at wide receiver, two names immediately come to mind here. Rico Scott, who was one of the top players out of Pennsylvania not too long ago. He was down in Alabama. He's from Harrisburg. He makes a ton of sense. You don't even need to justify that one to me. He's a local guy and he's talented. Get him back at Penn State. He's only an hour away, okay, being from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And then want to talk about another Ohio State player, former Ohio State player, I should say, because he transferred out and went to NC State, but now he's back in the portal. Noah Rogers, kind of the same thing, just never found his footing, never really materialized. I mean, that was one of the best wide receivers not too long ago in a high school recruiting class. Brian, if you had your choice, if you could only pick one of the two, would it be Rico Scott? For me, I'd probably be Rico.
I would go Rico because he's probably more likely to be retained after this year because he's played at Bishop McDevitt, right down the road in Harrisburg. But everybody's got their own thoughts on that. And the Noah Rogers kid might have more talent, but he's a North Carolina guy. How much are you really going to hit that? And he's done okay at NC State. There was just nowhere to go at Ohio State. He didn't want to wait that long. So
yeah,
I get it, but you can't go wrong with either because Penn State needs bodies and they need playmakers. And both of those guys can be definite playmakers.
They could find their way into the starting lineup. And while I am content, while I am eager to see what Sowell, Eskelson, and Kobe Howard can all do as the current starting trio, you want to add more competition. You want to add more depth. Iron sharpens iron. So that's not just because I have guys that I think are starting caliber doesn't mean I don't want to add to that with Rico Scott and or Noah Rogers. So Penn State's still going to be targeting wide receiver. Let's flip it over to the defense, Brian. There's tons of names that we could throw out there, but I kind of want to discuss the immediate ones. Again, people that are visiting too. How about Keanu Williams? And we talked about our need for defensive linemen, but also the type of defensive lineman, somebody who could be a nose tackle here for Penn State potentially, or just a jumbo defensive end, defensive tackle hybrid. 6'5", 320 pounds, redshirt senior coming over potentially from UCLA. He's scheduled for a visit. Keanu Williams. He was a starter. He started 11 games last season for UCLA. That's the connection to new defensive line coach Ikaika Malloy. This is one I'm anticipating. And I know it's not a guarantee, but the fact that somebody from California is visiting Penn State, he's got the connection to UCLA's former defensive coordinator, now Penn State's defensive line coach in Malloy. There's your impact player at that nose tackle, larger defensive lineman spot.
That would be exactly what the doctor ordered because you can use him at 0 tech or 1 tech, 2-eye, do all those different things depending on what you're running on that given play to try to cause some havoc for the offense. Penn State needs a couple of defensive linemen if they get one that's more of the quote-unquote hulking style, which is probably good. And now they need, one other guy that can be more of a penetrator. But getting the nose guard's the hardest thing. Yeah. There are very few of those guys that can play that because it's even different than being a guy that's a D tackle because being over 300 pounds and taking on multiple blockers is not normal.
Here's a player that, as we have this conversation presently, I think things could radically change against Penn State, right? This could go against them. Anto Saka. Penn State social media was buzzing when his name went into the portal because Penn State just hired, go figure, the Northwestern defensive line coach to join Penn State staff. And Saka immediately goes into the portal after the news break. So, this makes a ton of sense. He's going to follow his defensive line coach to Happy Valley. Texas A&M got involved. But this is why. It's because he is a star pass rusher. Saka has those Chop Robinson, right? I don't know that I'll go all the way to Abdul Carter, right? But somebody that is the reason, his stats are okay, and he's at Northwestern. The reason they're okay stats is because he's double teamed. The game plan is built around him. All you have to do is take away Saka, and Northwestern's defense is severely limited. Okay, you get him in a supporting cast with Tony Rojas, potentially Keanu Williams, right? Just other players that you need to isolate and focus on. That gives Saka more one-on-one opportunities. But as we sit here, as we talk about this, it seems like things are trending towards Texas A&M. But if Penn State's able to circle the wagons here, arguably the best get, whether it's a Penn State retained player, a Iowa State transfer, or a non-Iowa State transfer, this guy is going to be in the top 3 if Penn State's able to somehow land him.
Sometimes you got to find a way. You may have to dig into the bank account a little extra. A&M certainly not hurting in that category either.
Oil money.
100%. That's exactly what it is. But that's reality of the portal, and A&M capitalizes. And they've always prioritized D linemen, and they lost the Cassius Howell kid that's SEC Player of the Year. So they need to find another one. So that's not really surprising. The other thing is they still need to find, just like I saw about on offense, etc. Who's going to be that FCS or D2 kid that Penn State brings in defensively? Doesn't have to be star quality, but like, are they going to find somebody like that? Like Cignetti made a living off that the last couple of years. It's been amazing.
I got a name for you then, Zion Chapman out of Florida International. He was originally at Lackawanna College, so there's the Pennsylvania locality to it.
Sure.
And he's actually fairly highly respected not highly, but he's fairly respected in the On3 and 24/7 rankings as a guy that, Penn State's going to have competition, but there's your jumbo defensive lineman that is going to eat up space, but he also moves pretty well for his size.
That's so important. Having players that can take on a double team. Not every squad's got one of those. And if you've got multiple, you can really do different things with your fronts, especially since Iowa State staff, they ran everything to try to confuse teams because they weren't out talenting you. Yeah. But they did have some size, and they had a few guys, that probably overachieved their recruiting ranking. Some of them are already headed to Happy Valley, and maybe 1 or 2 more will as well.
Combine the two. Combine the comprehensive scheme that maximizes the skill sets now with the talent and the depth. That's the idea here with Matt Campbell and what they're going to do at Penn State. And we're going to wrap things up here on this Locked On crossover, talking all things Penn State, talking all things transfer portal. That's why we bring this crossover to you. My name is Zach Seyko, the host of Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Brian Smith, the recruiting expert, portal expert here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Check out both of our channels for daily content around the portal, around Penn State on YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Brian, this was great as always, and I'm looking forward to it again the second we get to chat, because we're going to have only more updates here with what Penn State's trying to build.
Absolutely.